Carl Jung made a controversial claim that most INFJs refuse to accept. He argued that your greatest source of power isn't your empathy or your idealism. It's the psychological darkness you've spent your entire life trying to suppress. Jung called this your shadow, and he believed that INFJs who fear their own psychological depth will always remain powerless in strategic situations. Here's the brutal truth. Society has conditioned you to believe that your capacity for manipulation, emotional detachment, and strategic thinking makes you a bad person. So you've buried these traits so deep that you can't access them when you actually need them. But Jung discovered something remarkable. When INFJs finally integrate their shadow instead of running from it, they become the most psychologically sophisticated strategists on the planet. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test. The shadow, Jung's most misunderstood concept for INFJs. Jung defined the shadow as the unconscious repository of all the traits, instincts, and capabilities that you've rejected about yourself. For most people, the shadow contains relatively simple things like anger or selfishness, but for INFJs, the shadow is far more complex because of your moral idealism. Think about this. As an INFJ, you've been taught that manipulation is evil, that emotional detachment is cruel, and that strategic thinking without considering everyone's feelings makes you a sociopath. So you've pushed these capabilities into your unconscious mind where they sit, unused and feared. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. Your shadow doesn't just contain your capacity for harm. It contains your capacity for psychological sophistication. The same mental processes that could make you manipulative also make you strategically brilliant. The same emotional detachment that seems cold also protects you from being manipulated by others. Let me give you real examples of what lives in the INFJ shadow. There's your ability to make calculated decisions without getting lost in emotional chaos. There's your capacity to withhold information strategically instead of oversharing. There's your skill at reading people's hidden motivations and using that insight to your advantage. There's your ability to set firm boundaries without needing everyone to like you. Most INFJs have completely suppressed these traits. You've been told they're dark, so you've rejected them entirely. But Jung discovered that this suppression creates a psychological split that actually makes you weaker, not stronger. When you suppress your shadow, you lose access to half of your psychological toolkit. You become the INFJ who gets taken advantage of in negotiations. You become the one who can't set boundaries because you're terrified of seeming mean. You become the one who gives away your power because you think strategic thinking is somehow immoral. The psychological cost of this suppression is enormous. Jung observed that people who reject their shadow often fall into depression, chronic people-pleasing, and what he called strategic blindness. They can see everyone else's motivations clearly, but they can't use that insight to protect themselves or advance their own interests. But here's where it gets interesting. Jung noticed that INFJs who finally integrate their shadow don't become manipulative monsters. They become the most ethically sophisticated strategists he'd ever encountered. They can navigate complex psychological terrain that leaves other personality types completely lost. Why does this happen? Because INFJs who integrate their shadow understand both the light and dark aspects of human psychology. They can see manipulation coming from miles away because they understand how it works. They can set boundaries effectively because they're not afraid of their own psychological power. They can make strategic decisions because they've stopped believing that considering your own interests makes you evil. The difference between an INFJ who fears their shadow and one who has integrated it is like the difference between someone who's psychologically naive and someone who's psychologically sophisticated. The integrated INFJ doesn't lose their empathy or their values. They just stop being strategically blind. Shadow integration, from weakness to weapon. So, how do you actually integrate your shadow without becoming the manipulative person you've always feared becoming? Jung developed a specific process for this, and it's not what most people expect. The first step isn't to embrace your dark traits, it's to consciously acknowledge them without judgment. This means admitting that yes, you do have the capacity for manipulation. Yes, you can be strategically cold when you need to be. Yes, you can withhold empathy to protect yourself. Jung called this making the unconscious conscious. Most INFJs resist this step because they think acknowledging these traits means they'll automatically start using them harmfully. But Jung discovered the opposite. When you consciously acknowledge your shadow traits, you gain the power to choose when and how to use them instead of having them control you unconsciously. Here's the difference between shadow integration and what Jung called shadow possession. When you're possessed by your shadow, these traits control you. You might become manipulative without realizing it, or you might swing from extreme people-pleasing to cold detachment with no middle ground. But when you integrate your shadow, you consciously choose when to access these capabilities. Let me give you practical techniques for this integration. Start by recognizing your shadow projections. When you feel intense disgust or anger towards someone who seems manipulative or cold, ask yourself what part of that behavior you've rejected in yourself. Jung believed that what we hate most in others is often what we've most strongly suppressed in ourselves. Next, practice owning your disowned traits in small, safe situations. If you've always suppressed your ability to be strategically withholding, practice it in low-stakes conversations. Don't share every thought or feeling immediately. Notice that you can choose what to reveal and when to reveal it without becoming a deceptive person. The key is conscious choice making. Instead of automatically defaulting to extreme empathy or complete emotional availability, pause and ask yourself what the situation actually requires. Sometimes the most ethical choice is to maintain emotional boundaries. Sometimes the most helpful response is strategic rather than purely empathetic. Jung observed that INFJs who master this integration develop what he called psychological sophistication. They can read people's hidden motivations, not just to understand them, but to protect themselves and make strategic decisions. They can see through facades and manipulation attempts that completely fool other people. This integration also transforms how you handle boundaries. Instead of setting boundaries apologetically or not at all, you can set them from a place of psychological strength. You understand that protecting your energy and interests isn't selfish. It's strategic wisdom. The most powerful aspect of shadow integration for INFJs is that it allows you to make tough decisions without losing yourself in emotional chaos. You can access emotional detachment when you need to evaluate a situation clearly. You can use strategic thinking to advance your goals without abandoning your values. Jung emphasized that this process maintains your core values while adding strategic effectiveness. You don't become less empathetic, you become more discerning about when and where to direct your empathy. You don't become manipulative, you become resistant to manipulation. The strategic INFJ, wielding psychological depth. When INFJs successfully integrate their shadow, they become formidable in ways that other personality types can barely comprehend. You develop what Jung called psychological sight, the ability to see the complete picture of human motivation, including the parts people try to hide. In negotiations, shadow-integrated INFJs have an almost unfair advantage. You can read the other person's fears, desires, and pressure points while maintaining perfect emotional control. You understand exactly what they're trying to accomplish and why, which allows you to craft responses that are both strategic and ethical. This same capability transforms your relationships. You can see through facades and manipulation attempts that completely fool others. When someone tries to guilt trip you or use emotional manipulation, you recognize it immediately because you understand how these psychological tactics work. You're no longer the INFJ who gets taken advantage of because you're too empathetic to see what's really happening. But here's what makes shadow-integrated INFJs truly dangerous in the best possible way. You can use your psychological insight as both a protective tool and a strategic advantage. You know when someone is being genuine and when they're performing. You can tell the difference between someone who needs help and someone who's trying to exploit your helpful nature. Other personality types struggle to manipulate or deceive you because you understand their psychological playbook. You've integrated your own capacity for these behaviors so you can spot them instantly in others. It's like being fluent in a language that most people don't even know exists. The transformation from naive idealist to sophisticated psychological strategist doesn't happen overnight, but when it does, it's remarkable. You maintain your core INFJ values of authenticity and growth, but you add layers of strategic thinking that make you incredibly effective in complex social and professional situations. Jung believed that this integration represents the INFJ at their highest potential. You become someone who can navigate the darkest aspects of human psychology while maintaining your ethical center. You understand that true wisdom requires acknowledging the complete spectrum of human nature, including the parts that make us uncomfortable. The shadow isn't your enemy. It's the missing piece of your psychological power that you've been taught to fear. Jung's brutal truth is that INFJs who continue suppressing their shadow will always remain strategically vulnerable, no matter how empathetic or idealistic they become. Start your shadow work today. Acknowledge the traits you've rejected, practice conscious choice making, and stop believing that strategic thinking makes you a bad person. Your psychological sophistication is your birthright. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.